Was it really worth it? Starting with the wage agreement, I'd like to give you some broad sweeps now. it will last for 3 years. Strikes for those 3 years will be prohibited. Workers will receive an increase of about R1,000 every year for those 3 years, and there will be a slight modification at the end. As soon as they arrive at work, now that's tomorrow, they're preparing to go back to work, they will receive backdated pay for about 4 months before the agreement is effective from last October. There you can see those earning $12,500 a month or more only receiving an 8% increase. So the main benefit of this agreement is for those entry-level workers who are earning way below $12,500. The big question we're asking, was it worth it? And we're going to zone in now on one unpacks worker receiving a basic of R5,500. Now that's basically in the middle if you look at the 3 companies. Let's see what the workers wanted. They started R12,500 for the lowest paid workers. This is what they get, R8,450 after 3 years. Let's look at it in percentages. The workers, in fact, we've lost those percentages, but I can tell you that that R12,500 was asking about 120% more. What workers have received in the first year is 18%. So we're way off that 120%, but it's much higher than the miners were offering. Now, this is what the worker has lost, roughly R30,000 over the last 5 months. To make it up, it will take more than a year and a half if that worker was debt-free. So that is a best-case scenario. Well, to discuss further, we're joined by Dawie Roodt from Efficient Group. And Dawie, that is the best case scenario. So if you're a worker who's lost over the last 5 months, it'll take you at least a year and a half. You've looked at some other scenarios. Thank you for joining us from our studio in Pretoria. Give us those other scenarios.
Good evening. Well, I brought my computer along because I built a small spreadsheet model to make some calculations and put some variables in to see what the numbers would have looked like. Let's assume if the workers accepted a wage increase of 7% in January, that means that your worker that receives $5,500 would have received nearly $5,600 or so starting from January. Now, what's the break-even point? Because we've got 2 scenarios. The one scenario is that they went on strike for 5 months. They lost 5 months worth of wages. And the other scenario is they accepted a 7% increase only. And how long will it take in the first scenario to catch up with the second scenario? And I ran that specific set of numbers now, and the break-even point will be after about 3.5 years. That's when the break-even point will be. If they started off with an 8% increase, for example, then of course the break-even point would have been a little bit later, around about 4 years or so. That's one possible scenario, and if you can give me any set of numbers, I can put it into my formula or in my model, I can work that out. Keep in mind that if you do not receive your wages, then you probably would have gone to somebody to borrow money somewhere. That would have cost you money. That would have been added. That would have been capitalized to your, let's call it, overdraft. And that would have meant that you would have taken much longer to pay off that debt. And in some instances, your repayment period would have been indefinite in order to get back to that break-even point again. Also keep in mind, my little model simply ignores the time value of money. So if you've borrowed this money, then you didn't pay interest on my little model that I have here, and the break-even point and a 7% scenario is about 3.5 years. The last point I think is also worth mentioning is that many shafts are already closed down. The likelihood is that the mines will rather invest in capital-intensive investments in future. They will not like to make use of labor, for example. So chances are that the number of workers that would have gotten jobs on the mines are simply not going to get those jobs. And maybe the last point, from a South African macroeconomic point of view, it's impossible to go back to yesterday. Lost production of yesterday is gone forever, and the damage to the South African economy was absolutely huge. And we send out a very important message to international and local investors that this is not a nice place to invest. Rather stay clear and go and put your money somewhere else.
Well, Dawie, you're painting a bleak picture, and let's go back to the workers. So it's a very long time to make up what you've lost. We're talking about somewhere between a year and a half and 4 years, depending on your debt.
Yeah.
What sort of role do you think that debt plays? Because some people may have got deeper into debt. Others surely could have declared a sort of force majeure with the creditors and maybe been written off their debts because of what happened.
Francis, I think it's important to note here that in my little model that I've constructed here, I simply assumed that they didn't borrow anything. So even if they haven't borrowed anything, with a 7% increase, if they accepted the original 7% increase, they would have broken even around about 3.5 years or so. If you include the impact of debt to the whole scenario, then everything changes quite dramatically. And the impact of debt and the repayment cost of debt extends this repayment period, if you like, to many, many years, decades, maybe even indefinitely. It is also probably true that in many instances some of this debt will not be repaid, and some people that are credit extenders or credit providers would certainly be in a very difficult position as well, and they will not be able to continue with their businesses as well. I do know that many businesses very far away from Rustenburg, for instance, I've been in the Western Cape, for instance, or in the Eastern Cape a week ago, and I know many smaller businesses there are really affected by what happened in Rustenburg area. So this is not only a localized problem, it's not only in the industry, in the mining industry, this is most definitely a macroeconomic problem. And if you add everything together, the cost to the South African economy in the first quarter probably far exceeded 100 billion rand.
Sure. Okay, so this is all negative, but when we consider, was it worth it? And I presume you would say no. But we do have to consider, Dawie, that the entry-level workers are in a much better position now. I mean, we've come off, and we've gone to an incredible level, considering the base level, an increase of 18%, which surely is unprecedented. In that sense, can Amcu declare victory?
Well, I guess in that sense they can declare victory. A rather few workers certainly are in a much better position now. The reality also is that far fewer workers will be employed now. I don't think that is the bulk of the workers. I think the bulk of the workers are probably people that earn round about 9,000-10,000 rand or so. Their increases are significantly less than that. So, but for the entry-level workers, I think Amcu can certainly say that it's a bit of a hollow victory, but it's certainly a kind of a victory, especially for entry workers. But if you extend that a little bit over time and ask the question, did Amcu contribute to the well-being of workers in South Africa? Then the answer, without a doubt, must be a very, very big no. Because workers as a group are certainly going to be, in many instances, worse off. And without a doubt, workers in the future, certainly in many instances, simply will not get jobs. I'm not so sure, although some small group certainly benefited, but I'm not so sure that one can say that the workers as a group benefited from these actions the past 5 months.
Sure. Well, thank you for your opinion this evening. That was economist Dawie Roodt crunching the numbers for us. Well, now